join me here on a hot afternoon in the Philippines. I want to talk today about gender dysphoria. This is something that I thought we kind of understood, but it's clear that we don't. So I'm going to have to go over it again, and willingly. It's really, really important. What is gender dysphoria? At its simplest, it's a feeling of discomfort caused by appearing to society in the manner that would normally be expected for a member of your birth sex. That's its most basic form. It can be very, very intense, or it can be rather mild and manageable. It used to be called gender identity disorder, but that was changed in the last edition of the DSM for a number of reasons. The first was that it's not always a disorder, because it can be very mild. And certainly some people didn't like the term disorder to be applied to it for political reasons, basically. I'm happy with the change because it removes the gender identity bit. Gender identity is a bogus concept. It doesn't exist. It's just sexuality. That's all it is. There's no difference between gender identity and sexuality. And since we already have sexuality, why do we talk about gender identity? It's a ridiculous redundancy. So dysphoria comes in 4 different classifications, and these are divided into 2 broad groups. The first is homosexual, and the second is non-homosexual. Now, in this case, when we say homosexual, we mean an individual who is attracted to the same sex from childhood. We're not talking about people who have acquired this sexuality. They've always had it. They'll typically have begun showing same-sex crushes at the age of 3, 4 or 5 years old. They were probably very strongly GNC as children. That is, they dressed up as the opposite sex. They probably may well have had a girl name, or they preferred to be called by girly names. They probably, like if they were boys, they probably played a lot with toys that would normally be associated with the other sex, that sort of thing. So these are quite clearly homosexual. And when we say homosexual in this context, that's what we're talking about, right? People who are attracted to the same sex from childhood. Okay, so you get homosexual and non-homosexual. Well, the non-homosexual ones are just everybody else. They're all the people who were not covered by the first classification. So this is a very broad church. That covers all your bisexuals, your heterosexuals, your alloerotics, and all the rest of it, because they don't fall into the first categorization. They were not exclusively attracted to same sex from childhood. Okay? And sorry if you find these classifications, a bit too rigid. It's just too bad. That's the way it is. The other set of classifications are by sex, male and female. So gender dysphoria is categorized both by sexuality, that is who you're attracted to, and by sex, that is what your birth sex is. And just to clarify, so you know, what is sex? Sex is a system of reproduction. And in sexually dimorphic species like ourselves, there are 2. One type, in this case the female, produces a large, relatively immotile, in fact completely immotile, cell called a gamete, a special sex cell, which only has one side of the DNA required to make an individual. And this gamete is called an ovum. The other type, which is called male, they produce a very small and very, very mobile sex cell called a spermatozoon, and this one, it's the one that finds the ovum and enters it. Now, because females only carry X sex chromosomes, the ova are always X, so they're always essentially female. Because men have both X and Y, spermatozoa are roughly halfy X and Y. So there's a roughly 50% chance that the sperm cell that encounters the ovum will be male, will be carrying an X, and a 50% chance of be carrying a Y. If the 2 X's come together, then you have a female individual being conceived, and if it's XY, it's a male individual being conceived. So that's your sex. That is fixed at the point of conception. It can never be changed. Doesn't matter what you feel yourself to be, that is your sex, right? What that means, by the way, is that all trans women are male, all trans men are female, and I don't care if they don't like it. They just are. So we've now categorised what sex is. Now, sex is a reproductive system, and it's incredibly important. The most important things for humans are survival and sex. You have to survive long enough to procreate, otherwise there's no point in you being here. It's a waste of time. Your genes are not interested in whether you're a CEO or a dustman. They're only interested in making sure that they're replicated. So replication is really important. Sexuality is how we decide with whom we want to have sex, right? So your sexuality is quite nuanced, and it depends on both physical, biological, and cultural factors. In some cultures, certain features are highly vaunted. In other cultures, they're not. There was a very interesting study done about 3 years ago, which sent an image of a woman around a bunch of graphic designers in many, many countries, I think about 20 different countries, and asked them to change the appearance of the woman using Photoshop to ideally suit what they thought would be most marketable in their own country. And amazingly enough, they came back with 20 odd different women, different body shapes. Not enormously different, but slightly different. So what that tells you is that there's a great deal about sexuality that's culturally informed. You know, there's no other reason why there would be these differences. A very interesting study. I kind of lost it. I'll try and find it and post it for you. So sexuality, where is that happening? It's not a physical process. This isn't like dogs. Dogs just have sex with dogs, you know, right? If it's a female dog, the male dog will want to have sex with it. But what we're talking about is something that happens in your head. Sexuality, therefore, is mental. It's a mental process in which we decide what kind of partner we want. Now, there is absolutely no point whatsoever in you deciding what kind of partner you want if you don't advertise this to your prospective partners, right? There's just no point. So what will happen is that you'll adopt an appearance and a set of social behaviours that you think are consistent with what your targets find attractive, right? So you are now playing to your intended partner's sexuality. You're trying to attract it. And the way that you do that is gender, right? That's what gender is. It's the way that you express or advertise your own sexuality to other people. And that's why you'll find that there are loads and loads and loads of different gendered presentations, because the people are actually looking for slightly different partners, right? I mean, even if you're deciding on male partners, some women perhaps will wear very classic business suits, high heels, cocktail dresses, that sort of thing. And they're probably looking for the kind of man who finds that kind of woman attractive. Others might like to wear jeans and Doc Marten boots, big sweaters, that sort of thing, because they're looking for the kind of guy that moves in circles, that likes that kind of thing. So these are gendered expressions. Okay? Gender is the way that you advertise your sexuality to the rest of the world. Now, what happens if you have a sexuality that is at variance with your underlying sex? Supposing that you're male, but you have a female sexuality. That is, you want to attract other males. What are you going to do? You know perfectly well that males are not attracted to males. The men you want are not attracted to masculinity. You know this instinctually, and you know this practically as well, because there's no way they'll come near you. So what do? Good chance you'll think, well, maybe I should make myself more feminine, right? Gender comes in two forms. It comes masculine and feminine. There are only two, because there are only two sexes and there are only two sexualities underlying. So you get masculine and feminine gender. What might well happen if you're a male who's attracted to other males is you might adopt feminine gender. Okay? Now that will make you what's called a transgender homosexual. You're a homosexual who's changed their gender into a form that is appealing to the same sex. That's your target sex. That's what you're trying to advertise. You're attracted, you're available. Now supposing you really, really wanted to have a nice life with a nice man. You're a male, we're talking about males. A nice life with a nice man. You want to attract a nice, straight guy. What are you going to do? Well, you're not going to appear as a gay, because the guy's going to avoid the gays. what you're going to do is want to look like a conventional woman, of the type that a man like that will find attractive. So depending on what kind of man you're looking for, you might again wear cocktail dresses and smart business suits, or you might wear jeans and a roll-top sweater. It just depends on what your taste is, what your sexuality is saying. That's the kind of guy I want. Right? So you see, this is all driven by sex and sexuality. All of it. Every single bit of it. There's nothing else there. It's sex, sexuality, gender. They're absolutely the same thing. Now, they're not the same thing, but they're interlinked. So what you've got now is a situation where if you have a gender, if you want to express yourself in a gender which does not map directly onto your birth sex, but you're prevented from doing so by the society around you, you'll experience gender dysphoria. Wallop, there you have it. It's very simple. You want to, if you're a male transgender homosexual, you're going to want to look feminine in order to attract men. And if you can't do that, you're going to feel bad. It's really that simple. It gets more complicated because these people are in competition with natal women for the men that they want, and they are male, so they can be very, very competitive. And so that's why some homosexual transsexuals are as stunningly beautiful as they are. They're naturally beautiful, but they maximise that in every possible way because they know they're in a competitive marketplace. They're competing directly with natal women. And very interestingly, I studied this quite a few years ago now, Brazilian travestis are pre-operative transsexuals, and a significant number of them are HSTS, although you do get AGP ones as well, would frequently move to Europe. And one of the things that often happens amongst this class is that they'll have GRS, they'll have genital reconstruction surgery, to give them a neo-vagina. And what they then will do, because they're nearly always sex workers, what they then will do is start competing as prostitutes directly with the natal women prostitutes. So they put on their profiles that they're women. And of course, if you already know them, you go, well, wait a minute, I know you're not a woman. But they're competing in the same marketplace, So not only are they incredibly beautiful, they're incredibly competitive. So that's what homosexual gender dysphoria is, and it's relatively easy to understand. That's simple. Once you understand that sexuality and gender are completely intertwined, then you realise that gender dysphoria is a natural result of people being denied the ability to express what their own sexuality is. Now, everybody accepts that the kind of homosexuality we're talking about here is innate. It appears in early childhood. It's not learned. So, obviously, the desire to change gender is going to always be there. If society says people who are attracted to men must look this way, then you'll want to look that way. And if you're stopped from doing so, you'll feel gender dysphoria. When we talk about the male and female forms, they're just inverted. So the things that are shifted towards the feminine in the male form are shifted towards the masculine in the female form. So transgender female homosexuals tend to be a bit bigger, bulkier, more masculine looking. They tend to affect masculine style. Their daddy-dad, when they were kids, they liked masculine toys and games, all that sort of thing. And only at the extreme end of that will they become what's called trans men, but that's an experience that I think nearly all transgender lesbians will agree that they have had, that they've always felt like boys. Now, the other classifications, if you recall, were non-homosexual gender dysphorias. And in males, all non-homosexual gender dysphorias are caused by autogynephilia, right, which is a man's propensity to be sexually aroused at the thought or image of himself as a woman, right? So it too is sexual in nature. And many people think that autogynephilia sits alongside normal heterosexual attraction. What happens is that the individual, if we're talking about males here, but the female side is very unstudied. If it exists at all, we're really not sure how it works. But in the male side, we're very, very familiar with it. What happens is that the man becomes sexually fixated on himself as the object of his romantic and sexual desire. But he's a heterosexual man, right? So the object of his desire has to be a woman. So what he does is he creates a second personality to play that role. And as I've said before, typically he'll buy clothes, do all the stuff that AGPs do. And that, if it gets serious enough, can cause big problems. Because during the course of their closet phase, autogynephilic transvestites feel gender dysphoria, but that causes them to go and want to pleasure themselves, to express themselves as women. If the autogynephilic second character becomes very strong, it can take over, and then they're going to feel gender dysphoria all the time. It's going to be very intense, and it's going to be constant. And so it's my girlfriend is making a noise downstairs. It's going to be constant and very, very debilitating. It's going to be a big problem. So now you see what we're talking about. Gender dysphoria is a symptom, right? Which can have varying forms, but it's a symptom which can be provoked by different underlying causes. Homosexual gender dysphoria, which causes homosexual transsexualism in its strongest forms, okay, is not the same as non-homosexual gender dysphoria. They're completely different. There's no relationship between homosexual gender dysphoria and non-homosexual gender dysphoria because it's rooted in sexuality, because gender is rooted in sexuality, and homosexuals are homosexual and non-homosexuals are non-homosexual. Now, a couple of wee things here. One of the things that we sometimes hear from autogynephilic transvestite activists is that, oh, wait a minute, there's evidence that homosexual transsexuals also show autogynephilic behaviours. Well, that was found in about 15% of Blanchard's cases. Nutbrock found slightly more, I think it was 30%. It's totally irrelevant. It's completely a bogus argument. Blanchard never said that homosexual transsexuals never have autogynephilic behaviours. All he said was that all non-homosexual gender dysphorias are caused by autogynephilia. It doesn't matter in this debate how homosexual transsexuals feel about themselves, because this is the single only plausible explanation for non-homosexual gender dysphoria. It's autogynephilia. Right? We already have a perfectly valid explanation for the homosexual form. It's because they're transgender homosexuals. And the natural endpoint of the scale of development of a transgender homosexual is transition. It's to become HSTS. That's normal, it's natural. Maybe they do, in some cases, show autogynephilic behaviours. That's irrelevant. Doesn't matter. The problem was always, how do you explain why heterosexual men would want to appear to be women? And the only plausible answer is autogynephilia. Right? So their gender dysphoria, if it occurs, and remember, lots and lots and lots of autogynephilic transvestites, in fact, lots and lots of autogynephilic men, because they're not all transvestite, manage to live with this condition all of their lives without ever actually experiencing dysphoria strong enough that they have to transition. Or, they feel they might want to try transitioning, which is more like how it is. There's no connection. There's no similarity between the homosexual and non-homosexual forms because one is homosexual and one's non-homosexual. It doesn't matter if the symptom is similar. I mean, you can get a headache from brain cancer, you can get a headache from drinking too much beer. They're not the same. They're just not the same. So we have to understand that gender dysphoria is a symptom that can be caused by a number of underlying causes. The causes can be classified in terms of their sex, that is male and female, and sexuality, that is homosexual and non-homosexual. In general terms, the sexuality classification is the more important of the two. So there's only two sexes and there's only two genders. Okay, it's that simple. The genders may have numerous cultural and other influences upon them which might make them look radically different, but underlying, they're dependent on sexuality. There's only two. When we talk about the non-homosexual forms, that is more complicated because the sexuality is, it's like a mirror image. It's reflexive on the self. But essentially, when you actually know some homosexual transsexuals and autoviolent gynophilic transvestites, even if they do live full-time as women, talking about males here, the differences are immediately obvious. Certainly there are some in Asia who can be a little bit difficult to tell, because they started the hormones at 14, you know. But once you get to know them, you're never left in any real doubt. You know HSTS they're socially and sexually women, and AGPs are actually men who look like women, okay, if they're lucky. Anyway, that's it. Saturday afternoon, I'm going to do stuff. You take care of yourselves, have a good weekend, and I'll see you on Monday, maybe. Take care, bye.